All right. So today I'm tackling a hard but urgent question. What happens when the role of the state is reduced to one thing, deciding who gets to live and who is left to die? So this isn't just a theory, we see it in practice every day. Take US foreign aid. When the government slashed funding for USAID's global health programs, experts warned that millions could lose access to HIV treatment, malaria prevention, food, basic health care, things like that. And these weren't abstract numbers, these were lives. That's a policy choice about who is allowed to survive and who isn't. Or look at COVID 19. In Navajo Nation, infection rates at one point were higher than in any U.S. state. From what I understand, centuries of underfunded infrastructure, lack of running water, limited hospital access meant people died at disproportionate rates. The virus didn't target them, neglect did. And it's not limited to the US, of course, when Israel's blockade on Gaza restricts medicine, fuel, and access to hospitals, and in many cases outright destroys things like hospitals. It's not just policy, it's the deliberate production of life threatening conditions where a child's access to it, basic survival and things like chemotherapy or even clean water really depends on geopolitics. And when we talk about children growing up in these systems, we can't ignore these unique economic and ecological and social realities. Sorry, I kind of got my words jumbled up there. Anyway, racism isn't an add on, it's embedded in the very scaffolding of survival. So, black mothers in the US, for example, are approximately three times more likely to die during childbirth than white mothers. That's not just health disparity, that's state enabled vulnerability. And in schools, calls to decolonize are not about swapping out a few books, they're about dismantling the underlying ideologies that normalize exclusion. So think of Indigenous children in Canada who were funneled into residential schools designed to erase their languages and cultures. It's a legacy that still shows up today in graduation rates, the self harm statistics, let's just phrase it that way so it's safer for YouTube, and also systemic underfunding of Indigenous education. So, where do we go from here with this sort of knowledge? I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything entirely new here, right? I think plenty of people out there have heard at least some of these topics before. So, the shift has to be profound. We need to move away from what scholars call a necropolitical model, a politics of death, and instead build systems that prioritize life, autonomy, and yes, dignity. And we see the cost of not doing this everywhere. Flint, Michigan, I happen to live in Michigan, by the way, but in Flint, there was a decision to cut corners on water infrastructure, and it poisoned thousands of residents with lead, most of them black and low income, and or low income, I should say. Or in the Pacific and Caribbean, where climate change is already creating refugees as rising seas swallow land and hurricanes devastate homes, while wealthier nations close their borders. That's why reimagining sovereignty matters, not as control from above, but as a practice of honoring diverse ways of being and broadening the concept of things like citizenship. So that's why the old ways of thinking are just no longer tenable. We really do live in a global world. So when the Maori in New Zealand successfully fought to have the Wanganui River, I probably mispronounced that, but they had it recognized as a legal person that is deserving of protection as a collective being. It was more than a legal win. It was sovereignty in action, presumably protecting life, land, and community against business exploitation of that river. So this isn't just a political project, it's also a moral one. We're asked to confront the deepest questions: which moral norms should guide us and why? Can we build societies rooted in justice, equality, and self determination rather than domination and exclusion, and frankly, stupidity and death, of course? So, decolonization in this sense isn't about swapping out leaders or tweaking policies. It's about pulling up the very roots of what could be called colonial logic and planting something radically different in its place. Only by embracing a decolonial perspective or a broader perspective can we create futures where the state serves as a guardian of life, not a tool of death. And that's another interesting topic, of course. Should the state play any role at all? Or should we strive more for a direct approach? And that, of course, gets into the questions of anarchism and things like that. But those are some of the basic questions that people should be ready to ask as society goes forward, and the consequences become clearer. So we have plenty of othered communities, and they should no longer be silenced, but recognized as co-authors of our collective future. And the shift shouldn't be considered optional. It's essential if we want things like justice and a society that truly lives. And you know the I guess the most accurate way to put it is a society that actually values life. You know what I'm saying? The alternative is a society that shrugs its shoulders at the phenomenon of imposed death and just the true scope of carnage that we've already seen, not just in history books but in the present day in the news headlines. And a lot of people are certainly encouraged to look the other way. We're supposed to deny what we're seeing with our very eyes, and that is really just a shame. That is something we need to work on to be able to actually express the basic facts of what is happening in the world. Because if if we're afraid to even acknowledge what we're seeing with our own two eyes, then what does that leave us with? We are lying basically with every time we see the world. We're just seeing through the lies. Not seeing through the lies in the sense of debunking them, but we're seeing through the eyes of the lies, I guess you might say. And it's very hard to say that we're heading in a direction of truth and facts when basically everything around us is structured through deceit and collusion with just sick and bizarre policies and ideologies. Well, anyway, this has been a fun episode, obviously. And yeah, my name's Wade, and you have just listened to Critical Wade Theory as I sort through the bull crap.